The hospital corridors were a blur of sterile white and flickering fluorescent lights, but for Daniel Harper, they were a battlefield. Every night, he pushed his janitor's cart through the labyrinth of Mercy General, the weight of the world pressing against his chest. His hands, calloused and stained with years of scrubbing floors, gripped the mop handle like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. At 42, Daniel was a single father, a widower, and a man who had learned to swallow his pride to keep his daughter fed. But tonight, something was different. The air was thick with urgency, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your heart race. A crisis was unfolding in the executive boardroom on the top floor, a crisis worth $100 million, and Daniel, the invisible janitor, was about to walk into the eye of the storm. What happened next would leave an entire room of powerful people speechless, their jaws on the floor, and a story that would ripple far beyond those hospital walls. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of the human spirit, please hit that like button, drop a comment, share this story, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more stories that remind us of the good in the world. Your support keeps these stories alive. Daniel's life hadn't always been this way. 10 years ago, he was a mechanical engineer, designing intricate systems for a manufacturing firm, his future bright with promise. He and his wife, Emily, had dreamed of a life filled with laughter, their daughter Lily's giggles echoing through a house they'd one day own. But cancer doesn't care about dreams. Emily's diagnosis came like a thief in the night, stealing her strength, their savings, and eventually, her life. Daniel was left with a toddler, a mountain of medical debt, and a heart so shattered he wasn't sure it would ever beat properly again. The engineering job vanished when he took too many days off to care for Emily, and with no degree to back his experience, having worked his way up through grit and self-taught skill, he found himself unhireable in his field. The only job he could land was as a janitor at Mercy General, the very hospital where Emily had taken her last breath. Every night, as he polished the floors where he'd once held her hand, the irony cut deeper than any knife. Lily was Daniel's anchor, his reason to keep going. At 9 years old, she had her mother's chestnut curls and a smile that could light up the darkest corners of his soul. But she was also a constant reminder of his struggles. The apartment they lived in was a crumbling one-bedroom in a neighborhood where gunshots were more common than birdsong. Daniel worked the night shift to be home for Lily during the day, helping with homework, cooking meals from whatever was on sale at the grocery store, and tucking her into bed with stories of a world far kinder than the one they lived in. He'd lie awake afterward, staring at the water-stained ceiling, wondering how he'd pay the electric bill or replace Lily's worn-out shoes. The hospital paid just enough to keep them afloat, but barely. Every paycheck was a tightrope walk, and Daniel was always one misstep from falling. The night of the crisis began like any other. Daniel clocked in at 10 p.m., his eyes heavy with exhaustion, his body aching from the previous night's double shift. The hospital was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like the calm before a storm. As he mopped the third-floor hallway, he overheard snippets of conversation from passing nurses, something about a system failure, a critical machine, and the CEO, Margaret Voss, barking orders. Daniel didn't think much of it. His world was spills and trash cans, not boardroom dramas. But as he made his rounds, the whispers grew louder. The hospital's new $100 million diagnostic imaging system, the pride of Mercy General, touted as a game-changer for patient care, was down. Completely. Patients were being turned away, surgeries delayed, and the hospital's reputation was teetering on the edge. Worse, the manufacturer's tech support was unreachable, and the in-house engineers were stumped. Daniel's curiosity stirred, a faint echo of the engineer he used to be, but he pushed it down. His job was to clean, not to fix. As he worked his way toward the top floor, the tension in the air thickened. The executive boardroom's glass doors were usually dark at this hour, but tonight, they glowed with light. Daniel hesitated, his cart parked outside. He could hear raised voices, Margaret Voss's sharp, commanding tone cutting through the murmurs of her team. "We're losing millions by the hour," she snapped. "If we don't fix this tonight, we're done." Daniel's instinct was to keep moving, to stay invisible as always, but something pulled him closer. He peeked through the glass, catching sight of a dozen suits around a conference table, laptops open, papers scattered, and a massive screen displaying error codes that looked like a foreign language to most of the room. But to Daniel, those codes were familiar. Painfully familiar. They were the same kind he'd troubleshooted years ago, back when he was designing systems not unlike the one failing now. His heart pounded. This wasn't his place. He was just the janitor, the guy who emptied trash cans, not the one who saved the day. But the memory of Emily's face flashed in his mind, her belief in him, her voice saying, "You're smarter than all of them, Danny. Don't let the world tell you otherwise." He thought of Lily, asleep in their cramped apartment, counting on him to keep their fragile life together. If the hospital went under, so would his job. And then what? Daniel took a deep breath, his hand trembling as he knocked on the glass door. The room fell silent, every head turning to stare at the man in the faded blue janitor's uniform. Margaret Voss, a woman known for her icy demeanor and impeccable suits, raised an eyebrow. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone dripping with dismissal. Daniel's throat tightened, but he forced the words out. He explained that he'd seen the error codes, that he'd worked on similar systems years ago, that he might be able to help. The room erupted in skeptical murmurs. A janitor, solving a multi-million-dollar crisis. It was laughable. But Margaret, desperate and out of options, waved him in. "You've got 5 minutes, she said, her voice a mix of curiosity and condescension. Daniel stepped into the room, the weight of every eye on him, and approached the screen. His hands, so used to gripping a mop, hovered over the keyboard. For a moment, doubt crashed over him like a wave. What if he was wrong? What if he made it worse? But then he saw Lily's face again, her trust in him, and he started typing. The codes on the screen were a puzzle, one Daniel had solved 100 times in another life. His fingers moved with a confidence he hadn't felt in years, navigating the system's backend, tracing the error to a corrupted firmware update that had locked the machine in a loop. The room was silent, the executives watching as the janitor, worked with the precision of a surgeon. In less than a minute, he'd isolated the issue, bypassed the corrupted code, and rebooted the system. The screen flickered, then lit up with the diagnostic interface, fully operational. A collective gasp filled the room. Margaret Voss's jaw dropped, her usually composed face a mask of disbelief. The lead engineer, a man who'd dismissed Daniel's presence moments ago, stammered, How did you do that?" Daniel stepped back, his heart racing, his hands shaking. He mumbled something about having seen similar issues in his old job, but the truth was, he didn't know how to process what had just happened. He'd fixed a $100 million crisis in seconds, but all he could think about was getting back to his mop, back to the safety of invisibility. The room exploded into chaos, executives clapping, engineers scrambling to verify the fix, and Margaret Voss staring at Daniel like she was seeing him for the first time. She demanded his name, his story, and as he spoke, haltingly at first, then with growing strength, the room grew quiet again. He told them about Emily, about Lily, about the years of struggle that had led him to this moment. He didn't mean to bare his soul, but the words poured out, raw and unfiltered, and when he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Margaret Voss, known for her ruthless efficiency, did something no one expected. She stood, walked over to Daniel, and extended her hand. "You're not just a janitor," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're a hero." She promised him a new role, one that would use his skills, and a raise that would change his and Lily's lives. But more than that, she apologized, for the hospital's oversight, for the world's tendency to overlook people like him. The executives followed suit, some shaking his hand, others clapping him on the back, their earlier skepticism replaced by awe. Daniel left the boardroom in a daze, his cart forgotten in the hallway, his mind reeling with the possibility that his life might finally change. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The hospital promoted Daniel to a systems analyst position, a role that paid enough to move him and Lily to a safer neighborhood, to buy her new shoes, to start rebuilding the life he'd thought was lost forever. Word of his story spread, first through the hospital, then beyond, a tale of an unsung hero who'd saved the day not with a cape, but with a mop and a mind sharper than anyone had bothered to notice. For Daniel, the real victory wasn't the job or the money, it was the look on Lily's face when he told her they'd be okay, that her dad wasn't just a janitor, but a man who could still make a difference. This story isn't just about a $100 million crisis or a CEO's stunned reaction. It's about the quiet strength of people like Daniel, the ones who keep going when the world tells them they're not enough. It's about kindness, second chances, and the power of seeing someone for who they truly are. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks to keep these stories alive. Your support means the world. Before we end, I have one special request. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time someone's kindness or unexpected talent changed your life. Let's inspire each other with stories of hope and humanity.